October 6th, 23 CE. Chang'an. The imperial capital, which had stood in glory for 200 years, was now being consumed by flames. Cries of battle surged from every direction, wave after wave crashing against the palace walls like a tide. The rebel forces had already breached the outer city and were advancing on the palace complex. Servants fled in panic, maids wailed, gold and silver vessels lay scattered across the ground. No one paid any heed to the ceremonial artifacts and curtains that symbolized the empire's majesty. Within the imperial city stood a structure called Jiantai. What was Jiantai? It was a lofty terrace built in the middle of Taiye Pool, surrounded on all sides by water, connected to the shore by only a single causeway. In peacetime, it was where the emperor enjoyed the view, observed the stars and conducted rituals. But at this moment, it had become the final stronghold of Wang Mang, the emperor of the Xin Dynasty. Wang Mang had fled here. He was 68 years old. A decade and a half earlier, he had been hailed by the entire court and country as a sage. 485,772 memorials had been submitted, urging his further ennoblement. The 4 barbarians came in submission, and 10,000 states paid homage. He believed himself to be the chosen Lord of Heaven, destined to end the age of chaos and usher in an era of great peace. In the end, amid the cheers of the multitudes, he had overthrown the Han Empire and ascended the dragon throne himself. But now, he wore the purple deep robe that symbolized the mandate of heaven. His hair was disheveled, his face haggard. Yet his eyes still flickered with an unsettling light. Not fear, but a near-mad obsession. Before him, a few astrologers were fiddling with divination tools, trying to read heaven's will in the movement of the stars. Wang Mang himself, following the position of the northern dipper, slowly turned his seat. He firmly believed that he was the one upon whom heaven's mandate rested. As long as his position aligned with the northern dipper, heaven would grant him power. He had once used that belief to convince the entire realm. But it clearly could not convince the rebel forces pouring into the palace like a raging torrent. The pools surrounding Jiantai proved no defense at all. The rebels felled trees to build makeshift bridges or simply waded through the water. They carried torches and blades, shouting cries for revenge. Some sought vengeance for family members driven to death by Wang Mang's tyranny. Others sought revenge for their homelands, which Wang Mang's reforms had altered beyond recognition. Still others could not say exactly why they had come. They only knew that this emperor was the source of all evil. Wang Mang raised his head. His last loyal guards urged him to take cover or flee, but he looked up at the heavens and let out a hysterical roar. That voice pierced the air around Jiantai, cut through the flames and smoke, and even drowned out the rebels' war cries. Heaven has entrusted me with its sacred mandate. What can these Han soldiers do to me? These words came from the Analects of Confucius. Confucius himself had said something similar to a man who wanted to kill him. Wang Mang had spent his entire life reading the Confucian classics, and in that moment, he saw himself as Confucius, as heaven's chosen sage. Even at the point of death, he believed heaven's mandate was on his side. Beside him stood a white-haired old man, wearing armor and carrying a sword, though he had little strength left to fight. His name was Kong Ren, Wang Mang's director of fate, a senior official in charge of celestial phenomena and destiny. The historical record mentions him only in this single scene, but his name itself is deeply ironic. Kong Ren, Confucius's benevolence, the benevolence of the Confucian school. Now this Confucian scholar named Kong Ren could no longer maintain his refined bearing. He tilted his head to the sky and wailed in grief. "Heaven! Oh, heaven!" What was he weeping for? For Wang Mang's defeat? For the disillusionment of the Confucian doctrines he had believed in all his life? For the tens of millions of common people driven to death by Wang Mang's policies? Or for the utopia that Confucianism itself had summoned into being and then destroyed with its own hands? The rebels stormed Jiantai. It was a battle with no suspense. Wang Mang's attendants fell one by one. Some threw down their weapons and fled. Some knelt and begged for mercy. Some were hacked to death by random blades. Blood splattered onto the purple deep robe that symbolized the mandate of heaven, onto the UD dagger, onto the astrological instruments. Wang Mang tried to make a last stand, but he was quickly pinned to the ground. Countless vengeful swords fell upon him. His head was cut off. That head would later be kept by successive imperial houses as a warning to usurpers, as a footnote to shame, stored in the palace for nearly 300 years. But no one expected that, more than 1900 years later, when the tide of communism began to sweep the world, the famous modern Chinese scholar Hu Shi would use English speeches and essays to rehabilitate Wang Mang, calling him the first socialist emperor of China. Even more surprisingly, 2000 years later, young Chinese people have given him another unexpected label: time traveler. Why would a usurper beheaded on a high platform receive such bizarre evaluations? And how did he manage to destroy both the Han Empire and his own Xin Dynasty? Let us begin at the start of the first year of the Common Era. The year 1 CE. 28 years had passed since Octavian was granted the title Augustus. The Roman Empire, born from the Roman Republic, now possessed a territory of about 5 million square kilometers and a population exceeding 56 million. At the same time, in the distant east, the Han Empire had already been established for more than 2 centuries. Counting the protectorate of the western regions, this Eastern Empire covered over 6 million square kilometers and had a population of approximately 59,600,000. But unlike the energetic Roman Empire, the Han Empire was now mired in troubled times. Its emperor had recently passed away, and a young member of the imperial clan, who was not the emperor's son, had been chosen as the new sovereign. The powerful minister who controlled the government gave the new emperor the reign title Yuan Shi, the beginning of all things, the origin of all things. The first year of Yuan Shi in the Eastern Empire corresponded exactly to the first year of the Common Era in the West. It was a striking coincidence that stirred the imagination of many. But beneath the coincidence lay a rotting empire. The outwardly huge Han Dynasty was riddled with internal decay. Land speculation was rampant. A small number of powerful families had seized most of the fertile fields, while countless independent farmers lost their land and became tenants or vagrants. Taxes were crushing, officialdom was corrupt, and natural disasters compounded social crises. The common people struggled on the brink of life and death. A minister submitted a famous memorial to the emperor, known as the 7 Destructions and 7 Deaths. In it he wrote bluntly, "The people face 7 kinds of ruin without a single gain. To wish for the state to be secure is truly difficult. The people face 7 kinds of death without a single chance of life. To hope that punishments can be set aside is truly difficult." The result was an empty treasury, insufficient expenditures. The people flee their homes and abandon their towns. Bandits rise on every side. Officials act like cruel brigands, and every year is worse than the last. More troubling still, the Confucian scholars, who controlled public discourse and thought, had grown completely dissatisfied with the Liu family's rule. Although Emperor Wu of Han had dismissed the 100 schools and exalted Confucianism alone, in fact, he and the emperors who followed him adhered to a philosophy of Confucian exterior, legalist interior, outwardly using Confucian moral teachings while inwardly employing legalist methods. When one emperor was still crown prince, he gently remonstrated with his father for imposing heavy punishments on ministers. His father scolded him roundly. "The institutions of our Han Dynasty are founded on the kingly way of Confucianism and the hegemonic way of legalism used together. How could we simply rely on so-called rule by virtue like the Zhou? Moreover, those Confucian scholars cannot perceive changes in worldly affairs. They delight in belittling the present and praising antiquity. They cannot even distinguish between name and reality. How could they be entrusted with the task of governing the realm?" He concluded, "The one who will throw my family into chaos is the crown prince." Naturally, the Confucians were aggrieved. They believed that the Han emperors had betrayed the core principles of Confucianism. If that was the case, why should Confucianism continue to provide ideological cover for the Liu family's rule? Thus they began to preach that the mandate of heaven could transfer. Only a few years after Emperor Wu's death, a Confucian scholar claimed, based on supposed celestial anomalies, that Gongsun Bingyi shall stand up, that a person of humble birth would become the son of heaven, and the current emperor should step aside in favor of a worthy. The scholar was beheaded. But just 5 years later, a man who had grown up in prison and in commoner homes, sickly and weak, with the childhood nickname Bingyi, truly became emperor. Later, another famous Confucian minister openly submitted a memorial saying, "Do not favor a single surname. Make it clear that the world is the world of all under heaven, not the world of one man." He too demanded that the emperor abdicate in favor of a worthy. In the end, he was forced to commit suicide. As time went on, this propaganda reached a climax. First, someone submitted a memorial saying the mandate could be transferred. Then someone wrote a book that declared bluntly, "The House of Han has encountered the great end of heaven and earth and should receive a new mandate from heaven." The Han Dynasty's mandate was the number 37 multiplied by 3. That is, 210 years. The Liu family had already ruled the empire for 200 years. Its mandate had little time left. Even the Han emperor himself was shaken. one emperor changed his own given name, changed his reign title, and staged a farce of receiving the mandate anew, like rebooting the system. Although the farce ended after just a month and everything returned to normal, it was a thoroughgoing demonstration of lack of confidence in the path, lack of confidence in the theory, lack of confidence in the system, and lack of confidence in the culture. To quote a later scholar, there were at that time many stories of disgust with Han. To be fair, from Emperor Xuan of Han onward, each emperor was worse than the one before. Weak, lustful, addicted to the harem, even favouring male lovers. From commoners to the powerful families, from Confucians to bureaucrats to the emperor himself, everyone knew that things could not go on like this. The public mood craved change. It was against this backdrop that a young man appeared in everyone's sight. This young man was born into a prominent family of imperial relatives by marriage. His aunt was the reigning Empress Dowager, and several of his uncles were enfeoffed as marquises in a single day, the so-called 5 Wang marquises. But his father had died too early to partake in this feast. His name was Wang Mang. It would be false to say that his starting point was low. He was born into a family of imperial in-laws, so at the very least he never had to worry about food and clothing. But the historical records describe him as orphaned and poor, which depends on the comparison. His father died early, his elder brother also passed away, and he had no title to inherit. His aunt, already in the palace, might not have remembered him among many nephews. Compared with his uncles and male cousins, who were arrogant, dissipated and endlessly pursuing power and pleasure, he seemed utterly out of place. That was what they meant by orphaned and poor. While other aristocrats spent their days cockfighting, racing horses and fighting for power, what did Wang Mang do? Apart from taking care of his elderly mother, his sister-in-law and his young nephew, he buried himself in study, specializing in the Confucian classics. He fashioned himself into the image of a standard Confucian scholar, wearing Confucian robes, always respectful and courteous, treating others with kindness. He often shared his salary with his retainers and commoners, and even sold his own carriage to relieve the poor. Many people think that Wang Mang's later rise was due to his aunt the Empress Dowager's favour, with the crucial step being his exceptionally filial behaviour during the illness of a powerful uncle. He waited on his uncle day and night, not even removing his clothes to sleep, caring for him meticulously, and thus moved the uncle to recommend Wang Mang to the Empress Dowager before his death, which allowed Wang Mang to rise from a minor official to the highest military commander in just over a decade. But that is not how it happened. Wang Mang did move people by establishing his moral persona of filial piety, respectfulness, studiousness, frugality and diligence. But the people he moved were not that uncle, nor his aunt the Empress Dowager. That uncle had controlled the government for 20 years, monopolizing power and purging dissenters. His aunt had started as the lowest-ranking palace lady, became first Empress, then Empress Dowager, surviving decades of fierce harem struggles as the final survivor. Would such a brother and sister really be swayed by appearances? Would they really hand over power to a young man step by step because of his supposed humility? The truth is, Wang Mang did not move his own family. He moved the people who controlled public speech and thought, the Confucian scholars and the common people. The things Wang Mang did next left everyone watching him utterly dumbfounded. The first thing happened when he was 30. At that time, there was a favorite minister, not only the emperor's favorite, but the emperor's maternal cousin, and also Wang Mang's own male cousin. This cousin, relying on the emperor's favor, committed many illegal acts. What did Wang Mang do? He directly submitted a memorial exposing all of his cousin's misdeeds. As a result, the cousin was stripped of his post, imprisoned, and died in jail. What does it mean to be impartial even toward one's own kin? This was the perfect model. Overnight, the great names of the court and countryside heaped praise on Wang Mang, and his reputation even surpassed that of his marquis uncles. A few years later, Wang Mang became the 5th member of his family to hold the highest military office, the Grand Marshal. Although he held a top position, Wang Mang gave away all the wealth and land he received to others. His lifestyle was even more frugal than before, to the point that his wife dressed like a servant. That year, Wang Mang was 38. The great drama had just begun. Its climax was still to come. A year later, the emperor, his aunt's son, died of illness. The emperor had no sons, so the throne passed to the grandson of a favorite consort. That consort's family rose to power, and before Wang Mang could even settle into his position, he was sent back to his fief. In his fief, Wang Mang kept a low profile and stayed behind closed doors. During this time, his second son killed a slave. What did Wang Mang do? He severely rebuked his son and forced him to commit suicide in atonement. Having done this, almost no one, Confucian or commoner, could doubt him any longer. Here was a true gentleman without peer in any age. So during Wang Mang's 3 years of seclusion, memorials and petitions pleading his case and demanding his return to court flew like snowflakes to the capital. However reluctant the new emperor might have been, he had no choice but to recall Wang Mang to the capital. Then came a script that had been performed before and would be performed again in the future. The short-lived emperor suddenly died. Wang Mang's aunt, the Empress Dowager, struck like thunder. She seized the imperial seal, expelled the court favorites, forced several empresses to their deaths, eliminated that consort family, and brought in a 9-year-old boy as emperor. Wang Mang was once again appointed Grand Marshal. This was the year we mentioned at the beginning, 1 CE, the first year of the Yuan Shi era of the Han Empire. Officials submitted memorials saying that the Han could not do without Wang Mang, and requested that he be given an additional title. What could Wang Mang do? He naturally declined, firmly, resolutely, absolutely. After several rounds of back and forth, Wang Mang, considering the good of the Han, finally reluctantly agreed to accept the title, but firmly, resolutely, absolutely refused the taxes from the 28,000 households that came with the grant. Instead, he dug into his own pocket, contributing 1 million coins and 300 Qing of land to the poor. Later, when a great drought and locust plague struck the entire empire, Wang Mang led the way. 230 officials and commoners donated their land and homes to relieve the disaster. An imperial park was abolished and turned into a county seat to house refugees. Even in the capital, 1,000 homes were built for the displaced. Thus, it seemed as if the following scene had unfolded. After 200 years of Han rule, the empire entered a long, hopeless night, pitch black without any promise of dawn. Suddenly, a lightning bolt tore through the darkness, and a towering figure appeared, too majestic to look upon directly. An official stepped forward, raised his arm and shouted, "I declare, Duke Anhan Wang Mang is the sage of our age. He is the reincarnation of the Duke of Zhou. Who supports? Who opposes?" No one opposed. This was a major turning point in Wang Mang's rise. Its importance lay not in the title he received, but in the fact that from then on, singing his praises became the political orthodoxy of the Han Empire. He no longer had to personally mount the stage and painstakingly cultivate his image. The Confucian bureaucrats had already pledged their allegiance, and they were masters of singing and playing. Another year passed, and Wang Mang attacked the new emperor's maternal family, provoking dissatisfaction and backlash from many people, including imperial relatives. They resorted to cursing Wang Mang by splashing dog's blood at his gate. Yes, literally, physical dog's blood. Now firmly in power, Wang Mang abandoned his former attitude of humility and retaliated against this act of desecration, aimed directly at his person with ruthless force. That consort family was wiped out to the last member, and the powerful figures implicated in the affair, including imperial clansmen and even members of his own family, all suffered the same fate. Not even his own eldest son and heir was among them. From his direct bloodline to his relatives by marriage to the imperial clan, all lost their heads. Over 100 people were killed in one stroke. The historical records say the court and countryside were shocked, the whole empire was shaken. But the real situation was probably one of utter silence. Everyone must have been terrified by Wang Mang's ruthlessness. No one knew when the blade might swing toward them. His aunt, the Empress Dowager, wanted to visit a princess who had been forced to commit suicide, to pay her respects as an elder. Wang Mang flatly refused. After all, the poisoned wine that killed that princess had been conferred by Wang Mang in the Empress Dowager's name. Given the Dowager's long experience, could she have been unaware of the twists and turns? But she too fell silent. By now, Wang Mang was no longer the little nephew who still needed her patronage. The first to recover from the shock were the opportunists with the keenest noses. Some bureaucrats immediately wrote 8 essays extolling Wang Mang's righteousness in putting the public good before private ties by destroying his own kin, and equated these essays with the Confucian classics, distributing them nationwide, requiring officials and commoners to study them, and making them compulsory material for the civil service examinations. Before the stench of dog blood had even dissipated, sycophants had already dyed their robes red with it and draped them over the sage. In the year after forcing his eldest son to his death, Wang Mang presided over the restoration of important sacrificial and educational sites outside the southern capital as prescribed in the Confucian classics. He built 10,000 homes in the capital to house Confucian scholars, summoned several thousand Confucian scholars from across the country to the capital, and vigorously promoted Confucian rites and moral teachings. The Confucian bureaucrats reciprocated by requesting that Wang Mang be given the title Zai Heng. Zai referring to the Duke of Zhou, Heng to Yi Yin, both of them unrivaled sages in Confucian theory. Wang Mang was not merely their equal, but combined the virtues of both, already surpassing sainthood. Then, the Weiyang Palace was flooded with protest letters from the common people. These letters came not only from ordinary people supporting Wang Mang, but also from imperial clan members, princes and marquises. They had two purposes. First, to criticize the court for giving too little too late to a sage like Wang Mang. Second, to criticize Wang Mang himself. How could he again and again refuse the court's rewards and the emperor's gifts? He was too modest. What was the Han emperor, who was desperate to regain the mandate of heaven, supposed to do? Did Wang Mang intend to abandon the Liu family as heaven itself had done? How many people voiced such opinions? The historical records note officials and commoners who wrote memorials because Wang Mang refused the fields at Xinye numbered from beginning to end 485,772. A precise figure down to the last digit. The Han Emperor that year was only 13 years old. 1 year earlier, his mother's entire family had been slaughtered at the hands of this sage, with over 100 implicated. The blood was barely dry. Now, faced with petitions that bore down on him like Mount Tai, he could only increase the rewards to Wang Mang. But Wang Mang once again declined, firmly, resolutely, absolutely. Amid the surging public opinion, 902 high-ranking officials and Confucian scholars, including ministers, academicians and court gentlemen, marched in grand procession to the imperial palace to instruct the emperor on his duties, demanding that the emperor bestow upon Wang Mang the 9 bestowals. According to the Confucian classics, the 9 bestowals included chariots and horses, robes, musical instruments, vermilion gates, elevated steps, bodyguards, axes, bows and arrows, and sacrificial wine. They were to be granted separately to those who had rendered extraordinary merits that reorder heaven and earth. But what if a once-in-eternity genius, a genius among geniuses, a super genius, was actually born in this world? What if there was a man who had either already achieved miraculous results, or had devised, deployed, and promoted miraculous plans, charted the direction, in short, was omniscient and omnipotent in politics, economy, social development, military affairs, diplomacy, culture, administration, justice, education, and every other field? Believe it or not, the people at that time believed it. To receive the 9 bestowals meant that a man had already completed all preparations, de jure, military, ceremonial, public opinion, and even theocratic, to take over the imperial throne. In short, the emperor had surrendered. This time, Wang Mang did not refuse. In a grand ceremony, Wang Mang accepted the 9 bestowals. The whole empire now knew where the wheel of dynastic destiny was headed. Perhaps it was no coincidence that exactly 1 year earlier in Rome, Octavian had formally fulfilled the adoption procedures in the Senate, announcing that his adopted son would be his heir and granting him tribunician power. This was a clear and unambiguous announcement to all Rome that this man was not merely an adopted son, but co-emperor of the empire and its next head of state. Of course, the Han emperor was no Augustus. and Wang Mang was no heir. The Han had its own national conditions. Even after the emperor's surrender, Wang Mang's preparatory work was not yet done. In the autumn of that year, the envoys Wang Mang had dispatched to tour the empire returned to the capital. They not only reported to Wang Mang that the empire's people, under the wise leadership of Duke An Han, had returned to purity of thought and achieved a life of well-being, but they also brought back folk songs spontaneously composed by local people in praise of Wang Mang, totaling more than 30,000 characters. After that, traditional auspicious omens were already passé, and a grand performance of finding fantastic beasts began across China and beyond. Yellow dragons, phoenixes and keelins all made their appearances. The Vietnamese of the south presented white pheasants. The Chang of the west presented black pheasants. And a little earlier, a small southern kingdom had shipped a live rhinoceros by sea. The 4 barbarians came in submission, and 10,000 states paid homage. After that, at the end of that year, the 14-year-old emperor died. Regarding the cause of his death, there are 2 theories. One says he died of illness, the other that Wang Mang poisoned him. Each has its supporters. But some scholars see this as later slander. The emperor was still a child. He had only just married Wang Mang's daughter as his empress. Killing the emperor would have been risky for Wang Mang. The decision would have been irrational. Most importantly, they argue, it is debatable whether Wang Mang had even decided to overthrow the Han Dynasty at that point. This reasoning is not necessarily wrong, but it certainly has problems. The emperor may not have been killed by Wang Mang, but Wang Mang certainly did not want the emperor alive. The 14-year-old son of heaven died. Wang Mang surveyed the Liu clan and found no suitable candidate. So he proposed a plan to the Empress Dowager and selected a distant great-grandson of the emperor as heir. But the child was not yet 2 years old. The great Han Dynasty would have to rest on Wang Mang's shoulders alone. But his surname was Wang, not Liu, so he was not emperor. He was merely helping to look after the house, like the Duke of Zhou. At most, he was a regent emperor or acting emperor. What could the Empress Dowager think? On the one hand, a stone had been unearthed, inscribed with the words, "Declare that Duke An Han Wang Mang shall be emperor." On the other hand, even a great Confucian, who would be celebrated for generations, wrote in his famous work that Wang Mang's virtue and diligence surpassed those of the Duke of Zhou and Yi Yin. The Han Dynasty's 210-year mandate should end right there. Look at the things Wang Mang had done. What could they be but the return of the sage kings Yao and Shun? The name of this great Confucian is so renowned, but even 2,000 years later, it is compulsory knowledge in Chinese textbooks. Besides him, a host of other major Confucian scholars of the time shared the same view of Wang Mang. So let us return to our earlier question. Whom exactly was Wang Mang trying to please? And who exactly chose Wang Mang? Who exactly pushed Wang Mang step by step onto the throne? Thus, the emissary Wang Mang, sent to persuade the Empress Dowager, said it very bluntly. Now that things have come to this, what use is weeping? Let it be so. 3 years later, after going through a few additional formalities that had become meaningless, Wang Mang, in January of 9 CE, forced the Empress Dowager to hand over the imperial seal, accepted the abdication of the Han Empire, declared a new dynasty called Xin, New, and assumed the reign title First Year of the Founding of the State. That year, Wang Mang was 54 years old. The court and the common people, especially the Confucian scholars and bureaucrats, were overwhelmed with emotion and tears, thrilled to witness a moment worthy of the abdications of high antiquity. In their eyes, this was a sacred beginning. The Confucian school was about to build its ideal state. Where would this leader, who had received the transfer of the mandate of heaven, this emperor acclaimed by the entire court and populace, lead an empire of nearly 60 million people? To understand Wang Mang's actions, we must first enter his inner world and find the source code of all his policies. Not, of course, Marx's Capital, nor later textbooks on political economy, but a Confucian classic, The Rights of Zhou, Zhou Li. This was a text that allegedly recorded the ideal society and official system of the Zhou dynasty in high antiquity. But in fact, after generations of scholarly scrutiny, the dating of the Rights of Zhou is highly suspect. Some say it was written in the early Han, some in the early Warring States period, some in the late Warring States period. What is certain is that it was definitely not from the actual Western Zhou era. Some historians, based on the names of offices, the content of ideas, and even rigorous calendrical and astronomical analysis, have proposed that the Zhou in Rights of Zhou does not refer to the Western Zhou, but to a small state during the Warring States period, a minor state enfiefed to a member of the royal house after its power had declined, where Confucians compiled and edited the work. The bad news is that it was really not written by the Duke of Zhou. The good news is that at least it wasn't written last week. But for the Confucians and for Wang Mang, who had just seized the empire, the Rights of Zhou was absolute truth. Wang Mang's state preceptor, a famous member of the Liu clan and a great Confucian master, clutched the Rights of Zhou in his hands, glared fiercely, and repeated the same line to all who dared object. "It is written in this book. The Duke of Zhou said so." To be fair, compared with the yin-yang, five-phase, and prophetic apocryphal texts that Confucians had previously favoured, the Rights of Zhou was still a step forward. At least it depicted a comprehensive, systematic, rational, and above all, sufficiently ancient system of state governance that achieved basic logical consistency. So for Wang Mang and the group of Confucian bureaucrats under him, the Rights of Zhou was not a reference book. It was a standard answer key to be copied verbatim, without changing a single character. What Wang Mang believed in was Confucius's dictum, "It is necessary to rectify names." He firmly held that if names were not correct, speech would not be smooth. If one could restore the names, grades, and rights of all things in the world to their correct Zhou state, then the chaotic real world would automatically become good and orderly. Thus, he not only renamed the Chang'an of the Xiongnu, surrendered slave who submits, but also renamed Goguryeo in the northeast, Lower Goguryeo. Domestically, he launched a massive rectification of names campaign, changing the names of all commanderies and counties to archaic, obscure terms. These moves, which today seem almost absurd, were seen by Wang Mang and his ruling team as the most important task of governance. But while domestic upheaval might not have shown immediate ill effects, foreign insults would bring swift retaliation. After ascending the throne in 9 CE, he sent envoys to demand, on the grounds of dynastic change, the return of the seal that the former Han Dynasty had given to the Xiongnu. But when the Xiongnu envoys received the new seal at the border, they discovered it was a seal of the Xiongnu of the Xin Dynasty, the seal of a vassal state called Xiongnu of the Xin, not the original seal of the Chang'an of the Xiongnu of Han, which had signified equal status between the Han and Xiongnu and had been a seal reserved for the emperor's own use or for enfeoffed kings. A single character made all the difference. The Xiongnu envoys immediately protested, vehemently arguing that this seal was not the one bestowed by the former Han emperors, that they could not accept it, and they requested the return of the old seal, the symbol of 60 years of peace and dignity. In the face of the Xiongnu's justified argument, the Xin envoy first tried to fudge the issue with political rhetoric. The old seal was granted by the Han. Now our Xin dynasty has received the mandate of heaven and changed the dynasty. All seals must be replaced with new ones. But this explanation obviously failed to convince the other side. Seeing the ceremony deadlocked, the envoy feared that if he failed to carry out Wang Mang's orders, he would be severely punished upon his return. So he played his final card. He first threatened the interpreter, ordering him to force the Xiongnu envoy to accept the seal immediately, or great disaster would befall him. Then, in a tense atmosphere, he hurriedly completed the ceremony of bestowing the new seal. But the truly humiliating act came after the Xiongnu envoy turned his back. According to the historical record, the envoy immediately ordered his men to violently smash to pieces the golden imperial seal, the one that had represented 60 years of friendship between the two states. It was an irreversible act. In the crudest possible way, it destroyed any room for negotiation and trampled the Xiongnu's dignity into the dust. When word reached the steppe, the Xiongnu Chang'an flew into a rage. He immediately realized that Wang Mang had no intention of maintaining the old suzerain-vassal relationship, but rather saw the Xiongnu as servants to be ordered about at will. The mask of peace was torn away, replaced by the most direct reaction of the steppe people: war. Yet Wang Mang did not take the Xiongnu's retaliatory raid seriously. After all, for his entire lifetime, the empire's borders had never suffered a major Xiongnu invasion. 2 years later, the Xiongnu Chang'an died, and the new Chang'an, for various reasons, sent envoys to seek peace with the Xin court. This delighted Wang Mang. But was the Xin dynasty so easy to offend? He set a condition. The Xiongnu must extradite 2 Xin defectors. Through secret mediation, the Xin court ended up buying back the 2 defectors at great expense. After all, no one wants to turn down money. But the peace bought this way did not even last a year. When a small state in the western regions that was friendly to the Xiongnu killed the protector general of the western regions, Wang Mang's fury turned on the Xiongnu. He announced 3 punitive measures. First, rename the Xiongnu Chang'an surrendered slave who submits, a slave who surrenders to me. Second, immediately conscript 300,000 troops from across the empire to march to the northern border to attack the Xiongnu in 10 columns. Third, dismantle the Xiongnu. Refuse to recognize the Xiongnu Chanyu's rule. Split the Xiongnu into 15 small tribes and enfeoff those tribes to various grandchildren of the old Xiongnu Chanyu who had previously submitted to the Han. The 300,000 troops were indeed conscripted. According to the records, the army was a motley collection of ordinary officials and commoners, professional soldiers, low-ranking officers and criminals, all gradually sent north to the border. What was the result? In 2 years, not a single proper battle was fought. Command was chaotic, morale was low, and the army remained encamped at the border commanderies for a long time. Generals were incompetent, and orders were not carried out. Soldiers either deserted or died of disease in large numbers due to climate change, food shortages, and corrupt administration. Eventually, the army, short of food, began looting the very border commanderies they were stationed in. Wasn't that a huge joke? They wanted to go on a long expedition north of the desert, yet they could not even supply food for themselves at their doorstep. If one looks only at the written records and theory, this outcome should never have happened. In the eyes of those who support the socialist emperor and time traveler theories, Wang Mang transformed the empire with economic policies that were entirely ahead of his time. These new policies can be roughly grouped into 3 categories. First, land reform by means of nationalization. Wang Mang's Xin Dynasty changed the name of all land under heaven to royal fields and prohibited their sale. Landlords who held more than the prescribed amount had to distribute the surplus to others, while those who had no land would receive it directly from the state. Second, liberation of slaves. Wang Mang decreed that slaves were to be renamed private dependents and become members of their owner's household. Like land, they could not be bought or sold. This nominally freed millions of slaves, making them registered households, that is, full citizens. Third, the economic policies collectively known as the 5 equalizations and 6 controls. Under Wang Mang's Xin Dynasty, the state monopolized the production and sale of liquor, salt, and iron, a great expansion of the state-owned economy. Price control bureaus were established in Chang'an and other major cities to set guide prices for various goods. The state provided low-interest or even interest-free loans to industrial and commercial operators and for funerals and sacrifices. In addition to traditional agricultural taxes, various commercial and industrial taxes were levied on mountains and marshes. It all looks very socialist. But what was the result? Where was the institutional advantage of the state-owned economy? The ability to concentrate resources on major projects? Where was the economic dividend that his policies should have produced? Where was the demographic dividend from the millions of slaves he liberated? Surrounding Wang Mang was a coterie of theorists. Their greatest talent was to find a seemingly divine and rational basis for every one of Wang Mang's decisions, drawing from the Confucian classics and prophetic apocrypha. Whatever Wang Mang wanted to do, they could prove it was where the mandate of heaven lay. And who were the people truly responsible for carrying out these divine policies? Take one core economic reform. Wang Mang appointed officials in major cities to stabilize prices and manage markets. most of these officials knew nothing about real economic laws. They turned the price-setting power and monopoly rights they held into tools for extorting merchants and competing with the people for profit. The historical records say that under their administration, the market saw farmers and merchants losing their livelihoods, goods and foodstuffs all ruined, and people weeping in the streets and alleys. Peasants and merchants were both out of work, supplies were critically short, and the common people, having no way out, could only wail and cry. When a government is staffed by theorists who explain the world and dogmatists who remake it, the greatest danger is that it will sacrifice the complexity of reality on the altar of theoretical purity, ultimately driving the nation into the abyss. And even more rigid than the bureaucracy was the tragic flaw of Wang Mang's own character. When an idealist holds absolute power, his obsession becomes the nation's greatest disaster. This is nowhere more evident than in his currency reforms. In just over a decade, based on various ancient records, he carried out 4 or 5 currency reforms, issuing 28 types of coins in different materials and shapes. The convoluted exchange rules and unstable value made private transactions almost grind to a halt. The economy completely collapsed. Yet he firmly believed he was following the methods of the ancient sages. The implementation of any reform is not simply a matter of the superiority or inferiority of a theory. It is also a brutal contest with the actual power structure. Wang Mang's power did not come from a thorough violent revolution, but from a segment of the old ruling class, specifically the Confucian scholar officials who controlled the discourse. That meant his governing foundation was itself composed of propertied people and potential vested interests. He did not have an iron army capable of penetrating to the grassroots and carrying out his orders with strong execution. All he could rely on were the same ivory tower Confucian bureaucrats. A regime that is inherently deficient in its power structure and cannot execute effectively, even if it holds the most advanced theory in its hands, is doomed to fail in shaking an old world with deep-rooted interests. And the more systematically complex the policies they implement, the more disastrous the consequences. Many people ask, didn't Wang Mang carry out land reform, taking land into state ownership and distributing it to the poor? Didn't he also abolish slave trading? Why did these policies, which seem extremely beneficial to the lower classes, fail to prevent the people from rebelling? The answer is brutally simple. These reforms, which truly touched the core interests of the powerful landlords and local magnates, were never really implemented from the very beginning. Faced with the overt and covert resistance of local magnates and old elites, Wang Mang and his Confucian bureaucrats showed astonishing weakness. They lacked both the ability and the courage to take wealth away from these true vested interests. Within just 2 or 3 years, the grand land reform and the abolition of slavery fizzled out due to opposition. There was no drawn-out armed struggle, no suicidal remonstrance, no blood shed before the throne. It was simply the ministers shouting, "Your Majesty, you cannot do this!" And Wang Mang replied, "Noted." What to do when reforms hit a hard wall? Wang Mang and his theorists chose the saddest and most shameful path: to pick on the weak. Unable to carve meat from the powerful families, they doubled the chains of exploitation and placed them on those who had even less ability to resist. small merchants and independent farmers. Through state monopolies and chaotic currency reforms, they used the name of the state to frantically compete with the people for profit. This was the most hypocritical and fatal aspect of this Confucian utopian experiment. It shouted the ideal slogan of equalizing wealth and poverty, but its actual practice was to rob the poor to feed the state. Confronted with a touchstone of vested interests, its vaunted benevolent governance revealed its true face: powerless against the strong, cruel to the weak. It talked ideology, but thought only of business. A promised land that swore to save the people ended up leaving the people homeless and scattered. If the border conflicts were still just a minor ailment, the next challenge would be a great ordeal for the Xin Utopia. In 11 CE, a colossal natural disaster struck. The Yellow River broke its banks in the region of modern Hebei and Shandong, causing an unprecedented major diversion. The river, abandoning its original course that had emptied into the sea near present-day Tianjin, surged southeastward like a rampaging beast, sweeping through the commanderies of Qinghe, Pingyuan, Le'an, Bohai, roughly covering large plains in modern southeast Hebei and northwestern North Shandong. The final result was that the Yellow River carved a completely new channel, emptying into the sea near modern Lijin in North Shandong. That meant that from the breach to the new mouth, tens of thousands of square kilometers of the North China Plain, the empire's core grain-producing and densely populated region, were either utterly flooded or turned into uncultivatable saline marshes. Millions of families lost their land, homes, and possessions in an instant. A natural disaster alone does not necessarily destroy a dynasty, but it is a brutal stress test. In fact, after the Great Diversion of 11 CE, the Yellow River would change its course 5 more times in recorded history and breach its banks countless times. But among the dynasties that saw a great diversion followed quickly by dynastic collapse, only the Xin and one later dynasty qualify. Those 2 dynasties shared one thing in common: they loved to make reckless, pointless changes. The truth is, the Xin dynasty inherited the massive bureaucracy of the Western Han. In the early days of the disaster, it did not do nothing. Wang Mang ordered the opening of official granaries to distribute grain to the victims. He even copied the legendary sage kings by announcing that he would eat only vegetarian food every day to show that he shared the people's suffering. On paper, the central government did take disaster relief measures. But this state apparatus, inherited from the Western Han, originally still possessing some grassroots execution ability, dead but not yet decayed, was eroded by Wang Mang's chaotic administrative system. Whatever remnants of execution ability it had were squandered in the implementation of policies that were both obsessive and fundamentally unworkable. Grain destined for the disaster areas was skimmed off at every level. The officials in charge of resettlement used the opportunity to line their own pockets. The benevolent policy of relief, by the time it reached the victims, had already turned sour. More importantly, the state's shattered execution ability was pitifully inadequate in the face of the immense wave of millions of starving refugees. It was Wang Mang's man-made disaster that corroded the very state apparatus that should have saved lives, causing it to malfunction. This directly produced a vast tide of refugees, which in turn provided millions of soldiers for the eventual peasant uprisings. The dividends of reform never reached the bottom. The costs of reform fell doubly on the bottom. At first, it was just a few sparks. In 14 CE, small-scale bandits and rebellions began to break out in Shandong and Sichuan. By 16 CE, one local strongman allied with the Chang and briefly captured several county seats. In 17 CE, the first truly significant armed resistance appeared. In Haikou County, an ordinary woman named Lu Mu, seeking revenge for her unjustly executed son, spent all her wealth and led a crowd to storm the county seat. According to the historical records, this was the first openly rebellious armed force at the end of Wang Mang's reign. Then, in Shandong, a refugee leader named Fan Chong, to distinguish friend from foe in the melee, ordered his men to dye their eyebrows red. Thus was born the Red Eyebrow Army, a force that would shake the empire. Finally, in 22 CE, quantitative change turned into qualitative change. The rebels hiding in the Green Woods Mountains of Hubei, the later Green Woods Army, for the first time defeated the Xin Dynasty's elite main force in a pitched battle. When word of the victory spread, the empire responded. The millions of refugees struggling in hunger and despair merged into an irresistible torrent. The utopia built by the sage and his theorists had long been saturated at its cold foundation with the blood and tears of countless ordinary people. Now came the hour of reckoning. June 23 CE. The Xin Dynasty's army was defeated by the Green Woods Army outside Luoyang, and Luoyang fell. The fall of Luoyang meant that the Xin Dynasty's entire eastern defensive line had completely collapsed. Wang Mang's rule was reduced to the single isolated city of Chang'an. In early August 23 CE, the Green Woods Army split into two columns and launched a general offensive, advancing westward through Wuguan Pass, heading straight for Chang'an. After the Green Woods Army entered Wuguan Pass, Wang Mang sent 9 generals with troops to stop them. These 9 were collectively called the 9 Tigers, a fierce-sounding name, but in reality they were a ragtag bunch thrown together at the last moment. Wang Mang gave them only a pitiful amount of pay. The soldiers did not have enough to eat and had no desire to fight. The Green Woods Army routed these 9 units at the Wei River. 2 of the 9 generals died in battle, 4 fled, and the remaining 3 gathered up their broken troops and retreated into Chang'an. The vanguard of the Green Woods Army thus pressed directly to the walls of Chang'an. When the news reached Chang'an, the court fell into a panic. Wang Mang called a council of all civil and military officials, but everyone looked at each other in complete helplessness. Some suggested Wang Mang surrender. He cursed them soundly and had them beheaded. Others suggested he retreat to the Longxi region west of Dasangguan Pass. Wang Mang rejected that too. He felt that abandoning Chang'an meant abandoning the mandate of heaven. Not until late August 23 CE did Wang Mang finally do something that seemed responsible. He ordered the release of all prisoners in Chang'an, gave each of them weapons, pardoned their crimes, and wanted them to defend the city walls. But as soon as these prisoners left the jail, before they could even pick up their weapons, they scattered in all directions. Who would risk their lives for a dynasty about to perish? On October 4th, 23 CE, the vanguard of the Green Woods army arrived under the walls of Chang'an. They launched their attack from the northeastern gate. According to the historical records, the loyalist forces defending the walls fought desperately, raining down arrows. But the rebel army was too large and their morale too high. The defenders gradually gave way. That very day, a dramatic change took place inside Chang'an. The city's residents opened the city gates one after another to welcome the rebel army in. Some even set fires inside the city. Flames leapt high into the sky. By nightfall, the rebels had fully secured the outer city. They set fire to the city gates, the flames reaching the side chambers and the Chang'an Hall. The side chambers being where the palace women lived, the Chang'an Hall being an important hall in the Weiyang Palace. The entire city of Chang'an blazed with fire, and the cries of battle shook the heavens. Wang Mang fled into the Weiyang Palace. He took shelter from the fire in the front hall of Xuanxi, but the flames soon spread there as well, forcing him to move elsewhere. Throughout the night, chased by fire, he moved from place to place within the palace. The Book of Han records that wherever Wang Mang took refuge, the fire followed, as if heaven itself were pursuing him. The next day, October 5th, 23 CE, the situation completely spiraled out of control. In Chang'an, an armed force of local residents rose up in response to the rebels. Several hundred common people, wielding wooden clubs and iron shovels, launched an assault on the Weiyang Palace. Wang Mang still had over 1,000 loyal guards at his side, the only force he could muster in his despair. These guards held the entrance to the palace, and the civilian militia was repelled several times. But just then, another rebel column swung around from the flank and breached the palace defenses. Wang Mang knew the game was up. With a few close followers, he fled through a rear gate, escaping from the Weiyang Palace toward a terrace structure within the palace complex, Jiantai. In the end, the rebels stormed Jiantai. Wang Mang was killed, his head cut off, his body dismembered. When the news spread, the remaining defenders in Chang'an collapsed completely. In the Weiyang Palace, palace women and eunuchs scattered in all directions. The treasury and armory were opened, and gold, silver and weapons were looted. The residents of Chang'an, the people who had endured Wang Mang's tyranny for 15 years, joined the looting. Some had come for revenge. Others simply wanted to survive in the chaos. In the following days, Chang'an was systematically devastated. The rebels not only burned the Weiyang Palace, but also dug up Wang Mang's family ancestral graves, dragged out the bones and burned them, and scattered the ashes into the air. They also burned the 9 temples, the Mingtang and the Biong that Wang Mang had built south of Chang'an, those enormous sacrificial structures that had consumed the wealth and flesh of the people. The fire lit up the sky, visible for dozens of li. The whole city of Chang'an was shrouded in smoke, filled with wailing. A city that had been built over more than 200 years was reduced to ashes in this great fire. From then on, the Eastern Han Dynasty, when it eventually established itself, would make Luoyang its capital. Chang'an was reduced to a provincial city, never regaining its Western Han glory. Even centuries later, when the magnificent Tang capital of Chang'an rose from the ground, it was not built on the site of the old Han city. The tragedy of Han Chang'an was only one small reflection. According to historical records, in the year 2 CE, at the end of the Western Han, the empire had 12.36 million registered households and a population of about 59.6 million. After Wang Mang's 15 years of rule and the subsequent wars, by the year 57 CE, 22 years after the Eastern Han was founded, the empire had only 4.27 million households and a population of about 21 million. That is to say, in a little more than 20 years, some 40 million people on this land had disappeared. A utopia that promised to save the people ended up devouring the very people it was supposed to protect. Wang Mang's labels as socialist emperor and time traveler are nothing but the script of a tragedy for which the rights of Zhou provided the libretto, the Confucians provided the actors, and the common people provided the sacrifice. 1300 years later, a great drought struck Shaanxi. The court urgently summoned an official who was already ill at home to go and relieve the disaster. That official gave away all his wealth to help his neighbors, then unhesitatingly went to his post, ultimately dying of illness while doing relief work. Passing through the Guangdong region that had witnessed the rise and fall of so many dynasties, seeing the ruins of the former Han capital Chang'an, he wrote his famous poem, Reflections on the Ancient Capital at Tong Pass. Peaks crowd together, waves rage in anger. The mountain pass of Tong Pass, between the Yellow River and the mountains. I gaze toward the western capital, my thoughts in turmoil. The Qin and Han passed by these roads, where 10,000 palace towers have turned to earth. When dynasties rise, the people suffer. When dynasties fall, the people suffer. When a dynasty rises, the people suffer. When it falls, the people still suffer. The tragedy of Wang Mang is not that he was evil, but that he trusted too much in the standard answers of books while knowing nothing of complex reality. His failure was not that he was incompetent, but that he held absolute power with no mechanism for error correction. All the grand ideals, the sacred titles, the exquisite theories, in the end, they turned into 40 million nameless skeletons.